Hello guys. I know this video is a bit late. I originally intended to release this video as a Halloween special, but circumstances outside of my control made that impossible. And I don't feel like waiting an entire year with this video taking up space on my very limited hard drive, so I will release it now instead. I hope you enjoy this spooky historical retelling of an horrible series of events in the American history. As always, if you enjoy your time here, please like and subscribe. The night is cold, and the meetinghouse is crowded. Candles tremble in their iron holders. The air smells of tallow and fear. A girl cries out from the front bench, her voice sharp, breaking the silence. She points, trembling, toward a woman standing in the shadows. She sends her spirit. The girl gasps. "She hurts me, even now." The woman denies it. Others begin to whisper. The minister bows his head. The magistrate raises his hand for silence. And in that still moment, the world changes. Close your eyes now and let yourself drift backward through the centuries. Feel the modern world falling away like autumn leaves, spiraling softly into darkness and memory. You are moving through time itself, through generations of voices now silent, through winters that have come and gone 300 times over. The air grows colder. The sounds of today fade into a deeper quiet. You are approaching the year 1692, in a land that will one day be called Massachusetts, but is now little more than a scattering of wooden villages clinging to the edge of a vast wilderness. This is New England in its infancy, a world of dense forests and darker faiths, of neighbors bound together by devotion and suspicion, of people who believe, absolutely, that they live under the constant gaze of heaven and hell alike. Let yourself settle into this place. Feel the rough grain of hand-hewn timber beneath your fingers. Smell the wood smoke curling upward into the gray winter sky. Hear the slow rhythm of an axe striking wood, the lonely caw of a crow in the bare trees, the creak of a door swinging open against the wind. This is Salem Village, not the bustling port of Salem town, but its smaller, poorer neighbor. A farming community of 600 souls scattered across rocky fields and frozen woods. The houses are plain, the windows small, the people devout and weary. It is January. The year is new. The snow lies deep and undisturbed. Inside these humble homes, families huddle close to their hearths, reading scripture by firelight, speaking in low voices. The cold seeps into the walls, into the bones, into the dreams of all who live here. On the surface, the village seems peaceful, but beneath the frost and silence, tensions simmer, land disputes, grudges, envy, resentment of ministers and neighbors alike. And deeper still, there lingers something heavier, a fear that evil itself walks among them, unseen but watching. Before the accusations, before the trials, before the gallows, there was this: a village wrapped in snow and silence, a people waiting for a sign. The Puritan world, a universe of spirit and shadow. Imagine, for a moment, that you could see the world exactly as these people saw it. Not metaphorically, but truly, through their eyes, with their absolute convictions shaping every perception. The physical world around you, these houses, these fields, these forests, this is only the thinnest surface of reality. Beneath and beyond, and interpenetrating everything visible, exists a vast spiritual realm, more real and more important than anything you can touch. In this realm, a cosmic war is being waged for every human soul. On one side stands God, infinite and terrible in his righteousness, attended by angels and working through his chosen saints. On the other side crouches Satan, the adversary, the father of lies, attended by legions of demons and working through human agents, witches, who have made explicit contracts with him, selling their souls for earthly power and the perverse pleasure of harming their neighbors. This is not a metaphor. This is not folklore or superstition to these people. This is documented fact, supported by scripture, confirmed by educated ministers who have studied at Harvard College, validated by courts of law throughout Europe and the colonies. Witches are real. The devil is real. The battle for each soul is terrifyingly real. Every Puritan knows that they are deeply sinful, utterly unworthy of salvation. From birth, they carry the stain of original sin, inherited from Adam's fall in the Garden of Eden. Their only hope lies in God's grace, which he may choose to bestow on a small number of the elect, or he may not. You cannot earn salvation through good works. You cannot guarantee it through faith alone. You can only pray and hope and watch yourself constantly for signs that you might be among the chosen. This creates a peculiar form of anxiety, subtle and constant. You must behave virtuously, not because virtue will save you, but because if you are truly saved, virtue will naturally follow. Any sin, any failing, might be a sign that you were never among the elect. And worse, any unusual prosperity, any pride, any moment of pleasure might be a temptation sent by Satan to draw you away from God's path. In their daily lives, the Puritans of Salem village rise before dawn. The father of each household leads his family in morning prayers, reading from the Bible by candlelight. Everyone must attend. Children, as young as 3 or 4, are expected to sit quietly, to absorb these lessons, to understand that they too are sinners in need of redemption. After prayers, there is work, endless, exhausting work. The men and older boys go out to tend livestock, to chop wood, to repair fences damaged by winter storms. The women and girls spin thread, weave cloth, prepare meals, tend the younger children, make candles and soap, preserve food for the coming year. Nothing is wasted. Every moment must be productive, useful, godly. Sunday is different. On Sunday, everyone walks or rides to the meetinghouse for morning worship. In winter, the building is unheated. They cannot spare the wood for such a large space. People bring small warming boxes filled with heated stones or small dogs to hold on their laps for warmth. The services last 3 hours, sometimes 4. The minister preaches about sin and judgment, about the narrow path to heaven and the wide road to hell. Between the morning and afternoon services, there is a brief break for a cold meal, and then everyone returns for several more hours of worship. This is the rhythm of life in Salem village. Work and prayer. Prayer and work. The long, dark winters. The brief, intensely laborious summers. The constant awareness that you are being watched by your neighbors, by your minister, by God himself, and found wanting. Into this world, in the deep cold of January 1692, something strange begins to stir. The first signs: a darkness in the parsonage. The Reverend Samuel Parris came to Salem village 4 years ago, in 1688, and his tenure has not been smooth. He is a man of approximately 40 years, stern and somewhat suspicious by nature, formerly a merchant in the West Indies, who failed in that enterprise and turned to ministry as a second calling. He is not beloved by his congregation. There are disputes about his contract, about the firewood he is owed, about the ownership of the parsonage. Some families have stopped attending his services altogether. But in his household, he has tried to create a model of Puritan rectitude. He lives in the parsonage with his wife Elizabeth, his daughter Betty, who is 9 years old, his niece Abigail Williams, who is 11, and 2 enslaved persons he brought with him from Barbados, a woman named Tituba and her husband, John Indian. The household follows strict routines: prayers at dawn, Bible readings, work throughout the day, more prayers at dusk and before bed. The children, Betty and Abigail, are expected to be models of Puritan girlhood: quiet, obedient, modest, always conscious of their spiritual state. But something begins to happen to them in January. At first, it is small things. Betty seems distracted during prayers. She stares into the fire with an odd, fixed expression. Abigail becomes restless, fidgeting during the long silences of winter evenings. Then the symptoms grow stranger. Betty begins to make odd sounds, little cries and whimpers that she seems unable to control. She crawls under furniture, and will not come out. She opens her mouth as if to speak during prayers, but no words emerge, only garbled noises. Reverend Paris watches his daughter with growing alarm. Abigail begins to exhibit similar behaviors. The two girls sometimes freeze in odd positions, their bodies contorted, their eyes open but unseeing. At other times, they run wildly through the house, shrieking. They complain of being pinched and pricked by invisible hands. The village doctor, William Griggs, is called to examine them. He is an elderly man, trained in the medical understanding of his time, which blends physical diagnosis with spiritual interpretation. He examines the girls carefully. He finds no fever, no visible injury, no sign of any known illness. Their pulses race. Their eyes dart back and forth, as if tracking things no one else can see. They cry out in apparent pain, but there are no marks on their bodies. Dr. Griggs renders his diagnosis with great reluctance, aware of what it means, what it will unleash. The girls, he declares, are under an evil hand. In other words, witchcraft. Imagine the cold dread that must have settled over that household. Witchcraft, the word itself carries enormous weight. It means that Satan has reached into this minister's own home, has afflicted his daughter and niece. It means that somewhere in Salem village, there is a witch, perhaps more than one, who has made a covenant with the devil and is using demonic power to torment these innocent children. But who? Who could it be? The girls cannot say at first. They twist and cry out, but when asked who is tormenting them, they fall into their fits more violently. Reverend Paris prays over them. Other ministers are called in to pray. The fits continue. Days pass, then weeks. The strange affliction does not lessen. It grows worse. And then, other girls in the village begin to exhibit similar symptoms. Ann Putnam Jr., 12 years old, daughter of one of the village's more prosperous families, begins to have fits. Elizabeth Hubbard, 17th, who works as a servant in Dr. Griggs's household, is afflicted. Mary Walcott, 16, falls into convulsions. Soon there are nearly a dozen girls and young women, ranging in age from 9 to 20, all suffering from the same mysterious symptoms. Fits, visions, sensations of being pinched and choked by invisible hands, temporary inability to speak or hear. The village watches with mounting horror. This is not a single case of demonic attack, but an epidemic. Satan has launched an assault on Salem village, and he is working through human agents, witches who walk among the community, appearing normal, but secretly serving the devil. The pressure on the afflicted girls becomes intense. They must name their tormentors. The safety of the entire community depends on it. Ministers pray over them, asking God to give them the strength to identify the witches who are tormenting them. Village leaders question them gently at first, then more insistently. Their own families plead with them. Who is doing this? Who has bewitched you? You must tell us. You must. And finally, in late February, the girls begin to name names. The accusations begin. Tituba, Sarah Good, Sarah Osborne. The first three women accused of witchcraft in Salem village could hardly be more different from one another, yet each one is vulnerable in her own way, standing at the margins of the community's respect and protection. Tituba is the enslaved woman from Reverend Paris's household, brought from Barbados, a woman of indigenous Caribbean, or possibly African descent. The records are unclear. She is foreign, exotic, in this intensely homogeneous Puritan community. She speaks with an accent. She knows stories and practices from her homeland that seem strange and disturbing to English Puritans. Some later accounts, though these may not be reliable, will claim that she entertained Betty and Abigail with fortune-telling games, using an egg white suspended in a glass of water to divine the futures of their eventual husbands. Whether this is true or not, Tetubas is easy to suspect. She is different. She is powerless. She belongs to the very household where the afflictions began. Sarah Good is a homeless beggar, despised throughout Salem village. She is approximately 38 years old, but poverty and hardship have aged her. Her husband, William Good, is laborless and ineffectual. They have no property, no permanent residence. Sarah moves from house to house with her young daughter Dorcas, begging for food and shelter. She is known for muttering under her breath when she is turned away. And in a community that believes words have power, that curses can be real, these mutterings make her suspect. She is dirty, she is poor, she is angry, and she has nothing to lose. She fits the image of a witch in the community's imagination, a woman outside the protective boundaries of normal society, bitter and potentially dangerous. Sarah Osborne is elderly and infirm, rarely seen at Sunday worship due to her poor health. This alone makes her suspect. The Puritans see regular church attendance as essential, and absence raises questions about a person's spiritual state. But there is more. Years ago, Sarah Osborne scandalized the village by marrying her indentured servant before the end of his term of service, and by becoming involved in a dispute over her late husband's will, a dispute that set her against her own sons. She has violated the community's norms. She has shown herself to be willful and contentious. She, too, is vulnerable to accusation. On February 29, 1692, a leap year day, adding a strange calendrical oddity to the proceedings, arrest warrants are issued for these three women. They are to be examined on the first day of March. The examination takes place in the meetinghouse, which is packed with villagers. This is not yet a trial. Trials will come later. This is a preliminary examination, conducted by local magistrates John Hathorne and Jonathan Corwin, both from Salem town, men of authority and legal experience. The purpose is to determine whether there is sufficient cause to hold the accused women for trial. The atmosphere in the meetinghouse is charged with tension and fear. Imagine the scene. The bare wooden building, the morning light filtering weakly through small windows, the crowd of villagers pressed together on hard benches, their breath visible in the cold air. At the front, the magistrates sit at a table. The accused women are brought in one by one. The afflicted girls are present, seated where everyone can see them. Sarah Good is questioned first. Magistrate Hathorne does not approach this as a neutral inquiry. His questions assume guilt. His role is to extract confession or, failing that, to build a case for trial. Sarah Good: what evil spirit have you familiarity with? None, Sarah Good replies. Have you made no contract with the devil? No. The magistrate presses her. Why do you hurt these children? I do not hurt them. I scorn it. But as she speaks, the afflicted girls begin to cry out. They point at Sarah Good. They contort their bodies, falling into fits. They claim that her specter, her spirit, sent out by witchcraft, is at that very moment pinching them, choking them, tormenting them. The villagers watch in horror. They can see the girls suffering. They can see Sarah Good standing there, denying everything. But the evidence of their eyes tells them that something terrible is happening. This is the insidious nature of spectral evidence. The claim that a person's spirit can be sent out to do harm while their physical body remains elsewhere. It is evidence that cannot be disproven. The accused cannot produce an alibi because the crime is supposedly committed by their spirit, not their body. And only the afflicted can see these specters, so their testimony becomes the primary evidence. Sarah Good is returned to custody. Sarah Osborne is examined next, with similar results. She too denies any involvement with witchcraft. She too is accused by the afflicted girls, who writhe and cry out as she speaks. The magistrates observe all of this and determine that there is cause to hold both women for trial. And then Tituba is brought forward. Tituba's confession, opening the floodgates. What happens next changes everything. Tituba does not deny the charges. Instead, she confesses. Imagine the shock that must have run through that crowded meeting house. The first two women denied everything, but here's the third, and she is admitting that yes, she is a witch. Yes, she has seen the devil. Yes, she has participated in witchcraft. But Tituba's confession is complex and elaborate. It is not a simple admission of guilt. It is a story, vivid and detailed, that opens up a vista of horror far beyond anything the community had imagined. She tells them that the devil appeared to her, sometimes as a man, sometimes as an animal, a great black dog or a hawk. He commanded her to serve him and to hurt the children. At first she refused, he says, but he threatened her, forced her. She describes a book that the devil showed her, a book in which other people in the village had already written their names in blood. She saw 9 names in this book, she tells them. 9 witches. 9 Tauwine. Let that number settle into your mind as it must have settled into the minds of everyone in that meeting house. Not just these 3 women standing accused. 9 witches. Who were the others? Who else had secretly signed a covenant with Satan? Tituba continues. She describes witches' meetings, Sabbaths, where the practitioners of dark magic gathered. She speaks of flying through the air to these meetings, of conspiracies and plans to afflict more people, to harm the village. She implicates Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne, confirming that they too are witches, but she makes it clear that there are others, unnamed so far, still hidden in the community. The magistrates press her for more names, but she cannot or will not provide them. She has told them enough, though. Enough to make it clear that Salem village faces not 3 witches, but a conspiracy, a hidden network of devil worshippers living in secret among the godly. Tituba's confession is likely motivated by a combination of fear, hope for leniency, and possibly Reverend Paris's coaching. He may have told her that confession was her only chance for mercy. But regardless of her motives, the effect of her confession is transformative. It validates the entire witch hunt. If she is a real witch who has confessed, then witchcraft is truly happening here. The afflicted girls are truly being tormented. The danger is real. All 3 women, Sarah Good, Sarah Osborne, and Tituba, are sent to jail in Boston to await trial. They are placed in chains in cold, dark cells. Sarah Osborne, already elderly and ill, will die in prison in May, never having been brought to trial. But the accusations do not stop with these 3. Now that the community knows there are more witches hiding among them, the hunt intensifies. The spreading fear. March into April. The afflicted girls continue to have fits throughout March. Their symptoms, if anything, become more dramatic. They fall down in apparent agony. They claim to be bitten, and witnesses report seeing tooth marks appear on their skin. They sometimes appear to be struck by invisible hands, reeling backward as if from a blow. They speak of seeing specters that torment them, often describing these spirits in vivid detail. And they name more names. Martha Corey is accused. This is significant because Martha Corey is not a marginal figure like the first 3 accused. She is a respectable member of the church, a woman who has expressed skepticism about the witch trials. Her accusation shows that no one is safe. Respectability and church membership offer no protection if the afflicted girls name you. Rebecca Nurse is accused. This accusation sends shockwaves through the community. Rebecca Nurse is elderly, in her 70s, and universally respected. She is deeply religious, known for her piety and kindness. She is a member of the church in good standing, a matriarch of a large and well-regarded family. Surely there must be some mistake. Surely the afflicted girls are wrong in this case. But the girls insist. They say that Rebecca Nurse's specter comes to them. They fall into fits when she is brought into their presence. The magistrates observe these fits and determine that there is sufficient cause to hold her for trial, despite the protests of many villagers who find the accusation impossible to believe. The examination of Rebecca Nurse, held on March 24th, is particularly painful. She is hard of hearing, frail, bewildered by the proceedings. She maintains her innocence with quiet dignity. "I can say before my eternal Father I am innocent," she tells the magistrates, "and God will clear my innocency." But the afflicted girls cry out against her, and spectral evidence is given great weight. The list of the accused grows longer. Dorcas Good, the 4-year-old daughter of Sarah Good, is accused and arrested. Imagine that, a child of 4, examined for witchcraft, in prison. She will spend months in chains and will never fully recover from the trauma. Rachel Clinton is accused. Bridget Bishop, who runs a tavern and dresses in a rather flashy way by Puritan standards, is accused. Mary Esty, the sister of Rebecca Nurse, is accused. Elizabeth Proctor is accused, and when her husband John Proctor speaks forcefully in her defense, suggesting that the afflicted girls are lying or deceived, he is accused as well. Men can be witches too, in Puritan belief, though the term used for them is usually wizard rather than witch. The devil, they believe, is an equal opportunity recruiter. John Proctor's accusation shows that even strong, outspoken men are not immune. By early April, the jails in Boston and nearby towns are filling with accused witches. The afflicted girls are treated as heroines, as divinely gifted seers who can identify witches by sight. People bring them into their homes to determine whether unseen witches are causing various misfortunes. The girls are gaining power and attention on a scale that would have been unimaginable for young women in Puritan society. Men can be witches too, in Puritan belief, though the term used for them is usually wizard rather than witch. The devil, they believe, is an equal opportunity recruiter. John Proctor's accusation shows that even strong, outspoken men are not immune. By early April, the jails in Boston and nearby towns are filling with accused witches. The afflicted girls are treated as heroines, as divinely gifted seers who can identify witches by sight. People bring them into their homes to determine whether unseen witches are causing various misfortunes. The girls are gaining power and attention on a scale that would have been unimaginable for young women in Puritan society. The community is fracturing under the strain. Some families have members among the accused. Others have members among the afflicted. Old grudges are being pursued under the cover of witchcraft accusations. The Putnam family, in particular, one of the wealthier and more influential families in Salem Village, seems to be behind many accusations, with young Ann Putnam Jr. being one of the most active among the afflicted girls, and her parents, Thomas and Ann Putnam Sr., encouraging her and supporting the prosecutions. There are patterns to the accusations, though the people of Salem may not fully recognize them. Many of the accused are women who have violated social norms in some way. Women who have inherited property, women who have been involved in disputes with neighbors, women who have been outspoken or assertive, women who have lived outside male protection or control. The accusations often follow lines of existing conflicts and resentments. But to the people of Salem Village in the spring of 1692, these patterns are invisible or irrelevant. What they see is an escalating spiritual crisis, a battle between God and Satan being fought in their community, with their own children and neighbors as the battlefield. The courts convene. May and the beginning of trials. By May, the situation has grown so serious that the colonial government in Boston takes action. The governor, Sir William Phips, has just returned from England with a new colonial charter. He finds Massachusetts in the grip of witch hysteria. Dozens of people are imprisoned, awaiting trial. The accusations continue to spread. Governor Phips establishes a special court of oyer and terminer, a court authorized to hear and determine capital cases. He appoints 7 judges, including William Stoughton, the lieutenant governor, who becomes the chief judge. The court is to meet in Salem town to try the accused witches. The judges are educated men, respected in the community. They include magistrates, merchants, and military leaders. They approach their task with seriousness, believing they are doing God's work in rooting out evil. But they make a crucial decision that will shape all the trials to come. They decide to allow spectral evidence, the testimony of the afflicted about specters that only they can see, as valid evidence of witchcraft. This decision is controversial even at the time. Some ministers and scholars argue that spectral evidence should not be trusted, because the devil might be able to assume the shape of an innocent person to cause trouble. If Satan can appear as anyone, then seeing someone's specter proves nothing about that person's guilt. But the court decides that while spectral evidence alone should not be sufficient for conviction, it can be considered alongside other evidence. In practice, however, spectral evidence becomes the primary evidence in most cases, because there is rarely any other evidence. Witchcraft, by its nature, is a secret crime. There are no witnesses to a person making a covenant with the devil. There is no physical evidence of supernatural harm. The testimony of the afflicted, claiming they see the accused person's specter tormenting them, becomes the foundation of the prosecution's case. The first trial begins on June 2nd, 1692. The accused is Bridget Bishop. Bridget Bishop. The first execution. Bridget Bishop is perhaps 60 years old, though records from this era are imprecise about such things. She has been married 3 times. Her current husband is Edward Bishop. She operates a tavern, which makes her somewhat suspect in Puritan eyes. Taverns are necessary but morally questionable establishments where men might drink too much and engage in questionable behavior. She dresses colorfully, wearing a red bodice at a time when most Puritan women dress in dark colors. She has been accused of witchcraft before, years earlier, though those charges were not pursued. Now, in 1692, multiple people testify against her. The afflicted girls fall into fits in her presence. Men testify that they believe she cursed them in the past, causing various misfortunes. Witnesses report having seen her specter in their rooms at night. Physical evidence is presented. Rag dolls with pins stuck in them, found in her house. Puppets, as they are called, supposedly used in image magic to harm others from a distance. Bridget Bishop maintains her innocence. She denies ever seeing the devil. She denies practicing witchcraft. She cannot explain why the afflicted girls fall into fits when she is near. How could she explain it? She has no framework for understanding what is happening to her. The trial is brief. The jury deliberates and returns a verdict. Guilty of witchcraft. Chief Judge William Stoughton sentences her to death by hanging. On June 10, 1692, Bridget Bishop is taken to a rocky outcrop outside Salem town, a place that will come to be known as Gallows Hill. Imagine that journey, the cart ride through the streets, the crowd watching, some jeering, some praying. Bridget Bishop, dignified in the face of death, still maintaining her innocence. She is hanged. The method is brutal in its simplicity. A noose is placed around her neck, and she is made to stand on a ladder or cart, which is then removed. Death comes from strangulation, not from a broken neck as in later, more efficient hanging methods. It is not quick. It is not merciful. Bridget Bishop becomes the first person executed in the Salem witch trials. But she will not be the last. June, and the pace quickens. After Bridget Bishop's execution, there is a brief pause. Some members of the clergy express concern about the proceedings. A group of ministers, led by Cotton Mather, perhaps the most influential minister in Massachusetts, issues a document called The Return of Several Ministers. In this document, they urge caution. They suggest that spectral evidence should not be the primary basis for convictions. They recommend that the court proceed carefully and prayerfully. But critically, the ministers do not call for the trials to stop. They affirm that witchcraft is real and must be prosecuted. Their advice amounts to, be cautious, but continue. And in practice, the court continues to rely heavily on spectral evidence, because without it, they would have almost no basis for convictions. Throughout June, more examinations and trials take place. The afflicted girls continue to experience fits. More people are accused. The net spreads wider, reaching into neighboring towns. Andover, Topsfield, Gloucester. People are being accused of witchcraft throughout Essex County. Some of those imprisoned begin to confess. They have watched what happened to Bridget Bishop, who maintained her innocence to the end and was hanged. They have heard that Tituba, who confessed, was not executed, but remained in prison. The lesson seems clear. Confess and live, deny and die. But these confessions, extracted under the pressure of imprisonment and the threat of death, only seem to validate the entire proceedings. See, the authorities say, we were right. There were witches, and here they are confessing. The confessions often follow similar patterns, describing meetings with the devil, flying through the air to gatherings of witches, being forced to sign the devil's book. It's possible that the imprisoned accused are comparing notes, learning what the authorities want to hear. Some accused witches, however, refuse to confess, even when it becomes clear that this refusal will cost them their lives. July and August, the height of the terror. The trials accelerate. The court meets regularly throughout July and August. The pattern is similar in each case. The accused is brought before the judges. The afflicted girls are present and fall into fits. Spectral evidence is given. Witnesses testify about misfortunes they attribute to the accused's witchcraft. And the jury, composed of local men who believe absolutely in the reality of witchcraft, deliberates briefly before returning a verdict. On July 19, 1692, 5 people are hanged. Sarah Good, Rebecca Nurse, Susanna Martin, Elizabeth Howe, and Sarah Wilds. Rebecca Nurse's case is particularly tragic. During her trial, the jury initially returns a verdict of not guilty. This is extraordinary, the first and only acquittal in the trials. But the afflicted girls immediately fall into such violent fits that the courtroom erupts in chaos. Chief Judge Stoughton is clearly displeased with the verdict. He asks the jury to reconsider one of Rebecca Nurse's statements, suggesting it was an admission of guilt. The jury deliberates again and changes their verdict to guilty. Rebecca Nurse's family fights desperately to save her. They gather a petition signed by 39 neighbors, attesting to her good character. It makes no difference. Governor Phipps briefly grants her a reprieve, but under pressure from the afflicted and their supporters, he rescinds it. On the morning of July 19th, Rebecca Nurse is taken to Gallows Hill with the others. She is in her 70s, frail and dignified. She prays quietly. The 5 women are hanged together, their bodies left dangling as a warning. Sarah Good, even facing death, refuses to confess. When the minister, Nicholas Noyes, urges her to confess and save her soul, she reportedly says to him, "I am no more a witch than you are a wizard, and if you take away my life, God will give you blood to drink." This statement will be remembered, will take on the quality of prophecy when, years later, Nicholas Noyes dies from a hemorrhage, blood pouring from his mouth. The bodies of the executed are not given to their families for proper burial. They are thrown into shallow graves on the hillside. But Rebecca Nurse's family will not accept this indignity. Late at night, they come to Gallows Hill, retrieve her body, and bury it secretly on their own land, where they can mourn properly. 3 weeks later, on August 19th, 5 more people are hanged: John Proctor, George Burroughs, John Willard, George Jacobs Sr., and Martha Carrier. George Burroughs' case draws particular attention. He is a minister, a former minister of Salem Village, in fact, who had left under controversial circumstances years earlier. The accusation of a minister, a man of God, sends shockwaves through the community. How could a minister be in league with Satan? But Burroughs is convicted. At the gallows, he recites the Lord's Prayer perfectly, supposedly impossible for a witch to do. This creates doubt among the watching crowd. Some begin to murmur that a mistake has been made. But Cotton Mather, who is present, addresses the crowd from horseback. He reminds them that the devil can appear as an angel of light, that Burroughs has been tried and convicted by a lawful court, that they must not let sentiment interfere with justice. The executions proceed. John Proctor, before his death, writes a letter protesting his conviction and the methods of the court. He points out the obvious, that those who confess are spared, while those who maintain innocence are hanged, creating a perverse incentive to lie. His letter is ignored. By the end of August, 13 people have been executed. More than 100 are imprisoned, awaiting trial. The accusations continue. September, the breaking point. On September 19, 1692, the largest single execution takes place. 8 people are hanged on that day: Martha Corey, Mary Esty, Alice Parker, Mary Parker, Ann Pudater, Wilmot Red, Margaret Scott, and Samuel Wardwell. Martha Corey, remember, was one of the first respectable church members accused, a woman who had expressed skepticism about the trials. Her husband, Giles Corey, has also been accused. But Giles Corey refuses to enter a plea, refuses to say either guilty or not guilty. This is his form of protest, but it has terrible consequences. Under English law at the time, a person who refuses to plead cannot be tried. But there is a procedure called peine forte dure, strong and hard punishment, designed to force a plea. The accused is laid on the ground, and heavy stones are placed on their chest, gradually increasing the weight until the person either agrees to plead or dies. Giles Corey, in his 80s, is subjected to this torture. For 3 days he lies in a field, stones piled on his chest. Each day, the sheriff asks if he will plead. Each day, Giles Corey refuses. His last words, as more weight is added, are reportedly more weight. On September 19th, Giles Corey dies. He is not executed in the legal sense. He was never tried or convicted, but he is killed by the judicial system nonetheless. His death by pressing is the only such death in American history. On the same day, his wife Martha is hanged with 7 others. Mary Esty, the sister of Rebecca Nurse, writes a petition before her death. It is one of the most moving documents from the trials. She does not plead for her own life. She knows it is forfeit. Instead, she pleads for the court to change its procedures so that no more innocent people will die after her. She writes with dignity and resignation, accepting her fate, but begging that the madness be stopped before more lives are taken. Her petition, like John Proctor's letter, is ignored. By the end of September, 21 people have been executed, including Giles Corey. Dozens more are in prison. And then, quite suddenly, the trials begin to lose momentum. Several factors converge in October to slow and eventually stop the witch trials. The first is simple exhaustion. The people of Salem and surrounding communities have lived for 8 months in a state of fear and suspicion. Families have been torn apart. The prisons are overflowing. The economic cost is mounting, not just in terms of the prisoners who must be fed and guarded, but in terms of the disruption to normal life. Fields have gone unharvested. Businesses have suffered. The social fabric of these communities is fraying under the strain. The second factor is the expansion of accusations into realms that even the most fervent believers in witchcraft find difficult to accept. The afflicted girls have begun accusing people of the highest social standing. The wife of Governor Phipps himself is accused, though this accusation is quickly suppressed. Ministers are being accused. Wealthy merchants, people whose respectability and position make the charges seem absurd. When the accusations were directed at marginal figures, the poor, the contentious, the strange, it was easy for most people to believe. But as the net spreads wider, catching respected members of the community, people begin to question whether the afflicted girls are truly reliable. Perhaps some whisper, the girls are mistaken. Perhaps they are being deceived by the devil himself. Perhaps, in their zeal to root out witchcraft, the authorities have gone too far. The third factor is the courage of some of those imprisoned who refuse to confess even facing death, and whose dignity in the face of injustice begins to move people. The petitions written by Mary Esty and John Proctor, though ignored by the court, circulate privately. People read these words and see in them not the defiance of witches, but the righteousness of innocence. The fourth factor is that some of the afflicted girls begin to lose credibility. Their accusations become wilder, less consistent. Some are caught in apparent lies. A few people outside Salem Village begin to challenge them directly, pointing out inconsistencies in their stories, suggesting that the fits might be fraud or delusion rather than genuine spiritual affliction. In October, Governor Phipps returns from fighting a war against Native American tribes on the northern frontier. He has been absent during much of the trials. When he returns and reviews what has happened in his absence, he is troubled. The scale of the prosecutions, the social disruption, the imprisonment of people of high standing, All of this gives him pause. Moreover, ministers in Boston are beginning to voice stronger objections. Increase Mather, the father of Cotton Mather, and one of the most respected religious leaders in New England, writes a treatise called Cases of Conscience concerning evil spirits. In this document, he argues forcefully that spectral evidence is unreliable. He proposes the principle that it were better that 10 suspected witches should escape than that one innocent person should be condemned. This is a direct challenge to the methods of the Court of Oyer and Terminer. Increase Mather stops short of saying the court has condemned innocent people, but the implication is clear. If spectral evidence cannot be trusted, then the entire basis for most of the convictions is suspect. On October 29, 1692, Governor Phipps dissolves the Court of Oyer and Terminer. The special court that has conducted all the witch trials is disbanded. No more trials will be held under its authority. But this does not mean the accused are freed. More than 150 people remain imprisoned, awaiting trial. Their cases will need to be resolved. Winter 1692 to 1693. The final trials and the slow return to normalcy. In November and December, life in Salem village begins to return to a kind of normalcy, though it is a normalcy haunted by what has happened. The afflicted girl's fits become less frequent, less dramatic. People return to their usual concerns, preparing for winter, tending livestock, gathering firewood. But the memory of the summer's terror hangs over everything like smoke. In January 1693, a new court is established, a superior court of judicature, to try the remaining cases. William Stoughton is again appointed as the chief judge, but this court operates under different rules. Governor Phipps issues orders that spectral evidence is not to be admitted. Without spectral evidence, the prosecutions immediately become much more difficult. The new court meets in Salem, Charlestown, and other towns. It tries more than 50 cases between January and May of 1693, Dutch. Of these, only 3 people are convicted, and those 3 are convicted on the basis of their own confessions, not spectral evidence. Governor Phipps immediately issues reprieves for all 3, preventing their execution. In the other cases, without spectral evidence, the juries find insufficient grounds for conviction. One after another, the accused are acquitted or have their cases dismissed. By May, the trials are essentially over. Governor Phipps issues a general pardon for all remaining accused witches, and they are released from prison. But their release comes at a cost. Under the laws of the time, prisoners must pay for their own room and board while in prison. Even after being acquitted or pardoned, they cannot be released until these fees are paid. Some families are bankrupted trying to raise the funds. Some accused witches remain in jail for weeks or months after their pardons, simply because they cannot pay the jailer. Some never emerge from prison. Besides Sarah Osborne, who died in May 1692, others succumb to the cold, disease, and malnutrition of imprisonment. The exact number is uncertain. Record-keeping was imperfect, but at least 4 or 5 people die in jail without ever being tried. And for those who do emerge, their lives have been shattered. Their property has often been confiscated to pay court costs. Their reputations have been destroyed. In a society that places enormous weight on reputation and good standing in the community, being accused of witchcraft, even if acquitted, leaves a permanent stain. Little Dorcas Good, Sarah Good's daughter, who was imprisoned at age 4, is released after 9 months in chains. She is psychologically traumatized, her mind damaged in ways that her father describes as making her distracted. She will never fully recover. The aftermath. Living with guilt. In the years immediately following 1693, Salem Village and the surrounding communities try to move forward, but the past will not release them so easily. The first challenge is simple acknowledgement. What happened here? Were there really witches, or were innocent people killed? The community is divided. Some still believe the trials were justified, that real witches were caught and punished, though perhaps some mistakes were made. Others have come to believe that a terrible injustice occurred, that the devil deceived the community into destroying itself. In 1696, the Massachusetts General Court declares a day of fasting and prayer for the colony, asking forgiveness for errors made during the trials, though without specifying exactly what those errors were. This is the first official acknowledgement that something went wrong. In 1697, the same court addresses the issue more directly, acknowledging that innocent people may have been convicted and executed. They establish a process by which survivors and families of the executed can petition for restoration of their names and, potentially, financial restitution. Some of those involved in the trials issue personal apologies. Samuel Sewall, one of the judges, stands up in church on January 14, 1697, while the minister reads aloud his confession, acknowledges his guilt in the trials, and asks for forgiveness from God and the community. He will observe a private day of fasting and prayer on the anniversary of the trials every year for the rest of his life. The jury members from several of the trials issue a joint statement in 1697, saying they were sadly deluded and mistaken and asking forgiveness from the families of the executed. They express particular remorse about Rebecca Nurse's conviction, acknowledging that they changed their verdict under pressure. Ann Putnam Jr., who was one of the most active of the afflicted girls, issues a public apology in 1706 when she joins the church. She is 26 years old by then, no longer the 12-year-old girl who pointed her finger and sent people to the gallows. She confesses that she was deluded by Satan and asks forgiveness from the families she harmed. Whether her contrition is genuine or performed under pressure to gain church membership is impossible to know. She will die unmarried at age 37, having lived under the shadow of what she did for her entire adult life. Other afflicted girls never apologize. Some move away and marry, trying to leave their pasts behind. Some die young. Their individual stories fade into obscurity. Reverend Samuel Parris, in whose household the accusations began, tries to remain a Salem Village's minister, but the community is bitterly divided about him. Some blame him for starting the hysteria. Others defend him. In 1697, after years of conflict, he finally leaves Salem Village. He will minister in several other towns, but never with much success. The shadow of Salem follows him. The families of the executed fight for decades to have their loved ones' names officially cleared and to receive compensation. This is not simply about money, though the financial losses were real. It is about justice, about public acknowledgement that these were innocent people wrongly killed. In 1711, the Massachusetts legislature finally acts. They restore the legal rights of 22 of the accused in order that restitution be paid to their families. The amount allocated is £578 to be divided among the families. Not a large sum even by the standards of 1711, but at least an acknowledgement. Rebecca Nurse's family receives £25 sterling. Elizabeth Proctor, who survived because she was pregnant during the trials and was reprieved until after her child was born, and whose husband John was executed, receives £150 sterling. The distribution of funds is unequal and somewhat arbitrary, but it represents the colony's attempt to make amends. Some families never receive restitution because the legal process is complex and some people fall through the cracks. Some of the executed are not included in the 1711 reversal. It will take until 2001, more than 300 years later, before the last of the convicted are formally exonerated by the state of Massachusetts. Reflections. Understanding the incomprehensible. As you imagine yourself there, in Salem Village in the years after 1693, walking past the houses where these events unfolded, past the meetinghouse where the examinations took place, past the road that leads to Gallows Hill, what can we understand about how this happened? The people who participated in the witch trials were not monsters. They were ordinary people, trying to live godly lives in a harsh world, shaped by beliefs that we no longer share but which were to them as real as gravity. They believed absolutely in the devil, in witchcraft, in the constant spiritual warfare being waged for every soul. Within that belief system, hunting witches was not cruelty but necessity. not persecution but protection of the community. And yet terrible injustice was done. 25 people died, 19 by hanging, 1 by pressing, and at least 5 in prison. Dozens more were imprisoned, traumatized, financially ruined. Families were destroyed. The social fabric of Salem Village was torn apart in ways that never fully healed. The community would eventually split, with part of it incorporating as the separate town of Danvers. Looking back, we can see the factors that contributed to the hysteria. The genuine psychological distress of the afflicted girls, whatever its cause, whether epilepsy or ergot poisoning from contaminated grain, or psychological contagion, or deliberate fraud, or some combination, provided the initial spark. The Puritan worldview, with its emphasis on the devil's power and the reality of witchcraft, provided the framework for interpreting that distress. The social tensions within Salem Village, the disputes over land, over the minister, over Salem Village's relationship to Salem Town, provided the fuel. The legal system's acceptance of spectral evidence removed any brake on accusations. And the simple human dynamics of fear, of conformity, of unwillingness to question authority, kept the process going long after cooler heads might have prevailed. But there is something else too. Something about how groups of people can convince themselves of things that seem obvious falsehoods in retrospect. The people of Salem were not stupid. The judges were educated men. The ministers had studied theology and philosophy. And yet they convinced themselves that they could identify witches, that spectral evidence was reliable, that the afflicted girls were telling the truth. They convinced themselves because they wanted to believe, because admitting they were wrong would have meant admitting they had killed innocent people. Once the first execution happened, it became psychologically almost impossible to stop. To stop would be to admit that Bridget Bishop died for nothing. So they continued. And each subsequent execution made it harder to stop, until finally the sheer weight of the horror forced them to confront what they had done. The quiet of afterward. Imagine now that you are walking through Salem Village on a cold evening in late 1693 or early 1694. The crisis has passed. The prisoners have been released. Life has returned to its ordinary rhythms of work and prayer, of seasons turning, of children growing. But it is not the same village it was before. There are empty places at Sunday meeting where families once sat. There are houses standing vacant because their owners died in prison or fled in fear. There are children growing up without parents. Parents who survived their children's accusations only to find their families shattered. You can feel the guilt in the air, unspoken but pervasive, in the way people avoid certain topics, in the way they look away when they pass someone whose family member was executed, in the silences that fall when certain names are mentioned. Rebecca Nurse's family has buried her secretly on their property, but everyone knows the approximate location of that grave. Sometimes in the evening, you might see one of her daughters or sons standing there, looking down at the unmarked spot. They cannot put up a proper gravestone. Not yet, perhaps not for years, until the stigma fades, but they come to stand in that spot and remember. The proctor's children are scattered, some taken in by relatives, some bound out as servants. Their father died on the gallows. Their mother narrowly escaped the same fate. The family property was seized. The children are growing up, knowing that their parents were accused of one of the worst crimes imaginable. And though many people now believe the accusations were false, the taint remains. In Reverend Parris's house, where it all began, Betty Parris is now a teenager. The fits stopped, eventually, as mysteriously as they began. She will grow up, marry, move away, and live a long life. But she will never speak publicly about what happened in her father's house in the winter of 1692. That silence will follow her to her grave. The meetinghouse still stands, though some families have stopped attending. The divisions created by the trials are too deep. Some blame Reverend Parris for encouraging the accusation. Some blame the Putnam family for pursuing their enemies under the guise of rooting out witchcraft. Some blame the judges for their credulity, the afflicted girls for their accusations, or themselves for their complicity. And perhaps, in the very early morning or the late evening, when you walk past that meeting house, you might pause and think of all the people who stood there. Accused, accusing, witnessing. You might think of the testimonies given, the fits displayed, the verdicts rendered. You might imagine the air thick with fear and confusion, uncertainty, all mixed together into something toxic. But now it is quiet. The wind moves through the bare branches. Smoke rises from the chimneys. A dog barks in the distance. The ordinary sounds of ordinary life. Gallows Hill, a place of memory. There is a rocky outcrop west of Salem town where the executions took place. It is not a pleasant location. The ground is rough and strewn with stones. The wind blows cold off the ocean. And in winter, the place is desolate. The bodies of the executed were thrown into shallow crevices among the rocks, or perhaps buried in unmarked graves nearby. No one speaks of it much, but everyone knows where it is. In the years after 1693, people largely avoid Gallows Hill. It is a place of shame and sorrow, but sometimes family members of the executed make quiet pilgrimages there. They come to stand on that barren ground and remember their loved ones. They come to pray, or simply to bear witness, to acknowledge that this place exists and that what happened here mattered. Imagine standing there yourself on a gray autumn afternoon, the kind of afternoon where the clouds hang low and the air tastes of coming rain. The town is visible below, smoke rising from its many chimneys. The harbor beyond, with ships at anchor. The forest stretching away into the distance, still wild and dark. 25 people died because of what began in Salem village. 19 of them died here, on this spot. They died protesting their innocence, maintaining their faith, facing an unjust death with whatever courage and dignity they could muster. A nurse, 71 years old, a lifetime of piety and kindness counting for nothing in the end. Sarah Good, bitter and defiant to the last. John Proctor, who spoke out against the madness and paid with his life. George Burroughs, the minister, reciting the Lord's Prayer at the foot of the gallows. Martha Corey, whose skepticism about the trials led to her own accusation and death. Mary Esty, who wrote her petition not to save herself but to save others who'd come after her. And the others: Bridget Bishop, Susanna Martin, Elizabeth Howe, Sarah Wilds, George Jacob Sr., Martha Carrier, John Willard, Alice Parker, Mary Parker, Ann Pudater, Wilmot Redd, Margaret Scott, Samuel Wardwell, each of them a person with a full life, with stories and relationships and hopes and fears, reduced now to a name on a list of the executed. Their deaths accomplished nothing good. No witches were caught, because there were no witches to catch. The devil was not thwarted. If anything, the trial served his purposes better than any actual coven could have, turning neighbors against each other, making a mockery of justice, causing good people to do terrible things. But standing here on Gallows Hill, you might feel a strange sense of peace mixing with the sorrow. These people are remembered. Their names are known. The injustice done to them has been acknowledged, even if that acknowledgement came too late for them to hear it. They are not forgotten. The long shadow, legacy, and lesson. The Salem witch trials become a cautionary tale, a shorthand for mass hysteria and injustice. In the 3 centuries since 1692, the story has been retold countless times. In histories, in plays, in novels, in films. Sometimes these retellings are accurate. Sometimes they embellish or invent. But the core story remains. A community convinced itself that it was under supernatural attack, and in trying to defend itself, destroyed innocent lives. Future generations will use witch hunt as a metaphor for any situation where accusations spread without proper evidence, where fear overrides reason, where the accused are presumed guilty and cannot prove their innocence. The phrase will be applied to political persecutions, to moral panics, to any situation where people are destroyed by false or exaggerated accusations. But in 1693, 1694, 1695, In the years immediately after the trials, the people of Salem are not thinking about legacy or metaphor. They are simply trying to live with what happened. They are trying to rebuild their community, to make amends where possible, to forgive and be forgiven, to understand how they went so wrong. Some of them succeed, more or less. Samuel Sewell, the judge who confessed his guilt, lives a long and productive life, remembered for his honesty and his willingness to admit his mistakes. The jury members who apologized are eventually forgiven by most of the community. Ann Putnam Jr.'s apology is accepted, and she is allowed to join the church. Others never find peace. Reverend Parris leaves Salem under a cloud and never fully recovers his reputation. Some of the afflicted girls who never apologized are remembered with bitterness. Some families remain divided for generations over who was right and who was wrong. And for the families of the executed, there can be no full restitution. The money paid by the colony helps, but it cannot bring back the dead. The official exoneration helps, but it cannot erase the trauma. They carry their losses and their grief forward into new generations, passing down the stories, making sure that their ancestors are remembered not as witches, but as martyrs to injustice. A winter evening, the end of one story. Let yourself come back now to a quiet winter evening, perhaps in 1700 or 1701, almost a decade after the trials. The century has turned. A new era is beginning, though the people living through it do not necessarily feel that change. In Salem Village, now slowly healing, life continues. Children are born. People marry. Farms are tended. Sunday services are held, though with a new minister. Reverend Parris is long gone. The scars of 1692 are still visible if you know where to look, but they are beginning to fade, at least on the surface. An old woman, perhaps one of Rebecca Nurse's daughters, or Elizabeth Proctor, or any of the survivors, sits by her fire on this cold evening. Her children are grown, perhaps with children of their own. Outside, the snow is falling softly, blanketing the village in white, muffling all sounds. She is thinking about that year, as she often does on winter evenings, remembering the fear, the confusion, the terrible sense of powerlessness as events spiraled out of control. Remembering standing in the meetinghouse, watching the proceedings, unable to stop what was happening. Remembering the news that her mother, or her husband, or her sister had been condemned. Remembering the execution, but she is also remembering earlier times, before 1692, when her loved one was still alive. She remembers her mother's voice singing psalms while churning butter, her husband's laugh, her sister's gentle hands braiding her hair. She remembers ordinary moments, precious now in their ordinariness, from a time before fear and suspicion poisoned everything. The fire crackles. The snow falls. Outside, the village sleeps under its white blanket, the past covered but not erased, still present beneath the surface. She says a prayer, not the formal, rigid prayers of Sunday worship, but a quiet, personal prayer. For the dead, that they are at rest. For the living, that they might find peace. For her community, that it might never forget what happened and never repeat it. For herself, for forgiveness and understanding and the strength to carry on. The night deepens. The fire burns low. And eventually, she banks the coals, wraps herself in her blanket, and goes to sleep, as people have done every night throughout history, carrying their griefs and their hopes into whatever tomorrow brings. Closing, return to the present. And now, let yourself return. Let the centuries roll forward again. Let the past recede into the comfortable distance of history. You are back in your own time, in your own place. Safe and warm, and far removed from the cold and fear of 1692. But perhaps you carry something with you from that journey backward. A sense of how fragile communities can be, how fear can spread, how good people can convince themselves to do terrible things when they believe they are doing right. A sense of the importance of questioning, of demanding real evidence, of protecting the accused even when, especially when, the accusations seem credible to everyone else. And perhaps, too, you carry a sense of compassion for the accused who suffered and died, yes, but also for the accusers, most of whom were children or young women caught up in something they did not fully understand and could not control, for the judges who thought they were serving justice, for the community members who went along because going against the crowd seemed impossible, for all the people of Salem Village who found themselves living through a nightmare and could not figure out how to wake up until it was too late. History is not simple. The people in it are not divided neatly into heroes and villains. Most of them were simply human, fallible, frightened, trying to do their best in difficult circumstances, sometimes succeeding and sometimes failing catastrophically. The Salem witch trials stand as a memorial to that failure, but also to the possibility of recovery, of acknowledgement, of learning and growing from terrible mistakes. The people of Salem eventually confronted what they had done. They apologized, they made restitution, they tried to ensure it would not happen again. That does not erase what happened, but it matters. Let yourself rest now, with these images and thoughts drifting through your mind like snowflakes settling on the ground. The meetinghouse in Salem Village, quiet in the darkness. Gallows Hill, its stones cold and bare. The houses where people lived and died, loved and suffered, made mistakes, and sought forgiveness. Let it all settle into the peaceful distance of history, present but not threatening, remembered but no longer immediate. Let the voices of that time fade into a gentle murmur, like the sound of wind in distant trees, or waves on a far shore. You are safe. You are here, in your own time. The past is past, but its lessons remain, whispered across the centuries like a prayer, or a warning, or a lullaby to carry you into sleep. Rest. Now. Let the images fade. Let the story settle into your memory like snow, settling on a winter landscape. Soft, quiet, peaceful. The Salem witch trials, fear and faith in colonial America. A chapter of history closed, remembered, understood as well as we can understand it from this distance. Let yourself drift into sleep, into dreams where perhaps you walk through a quiet colonial village on a peaceful evening, where all the troubles have passed, where the only sounds are the wind and the distant calls of birds heading south for winter, and the soft, steady rhythm of ordinary life continuing generation after generation. Sleep well. The story is told. The remembering is done. Morning will come again, as it always does, bringing new light to old shadows.